Welcome to Flutter Teacher. In this session, I will explain what the constructor is, and I will also talk about 12 important features of constructor that every Dart and Flutter developer should know. So without wasting time, let's get started. Before I explain what the constructor is, I would like to explain the problem that we have to face when we initialize object by using a method. In order to explain that one, we have a class called person. Inside this person class, we have two fields, name and age. To initialize object, that is to initialize this name and age, we have a method called getData that accepts the value of name and age, and I'm assigning it inside the name and age variable respectively. In order to print the data, we have a method called showData that simply prints the value of name and age on the screen, that is over the console, by using the print function. Now inside the main function, I have single object of this person class, that is P, and over this object P, I'm calling getData by passing the value of name and age, and to print the data, I'm calling a method called showData. When I click on run button, you can observe here, I'm getting the value of name as Sam and the age is 21, and this code or this program looks perfectly fine. Let me explain two major problems that we have to face for initializing an object by using a method or the functions in the class. Let me explain the first one here. You can observe here, inside the main, we have a single object. Whenever we create the object of this person, we have to remember that there is something or there is some method that we have to call to initialize the data, that is to initialize the object. Now consider you are dealing with multiple objects. Then it might happen that over a particular object, you might forget to call such a method like this. Okay, so here I have intentionally removed the line to initialize the variable. Now, when I rerun the program, instead of getting the value of name and age, that is Sam and 21, I'm getting the null value here. This is because my variables, that is the name and age, are the nullable variable. So first problem is, if by mistake, if I forget to call such a method, then my value, that is my object, will remain uninitialized. Now let me explain the second problem here. You can observe here the variable, that is the field name and age, are the nullable. Now what if I want to make them as the non-nullable? Because when we use non-nullable means I want to use the null safety feature. So if I want to go with null safety, you can see I'm getting error here. That is, I need to initialize this name and age field here. One solution for this is the late. So you might suggest me that I should use a late modifier here, and that's going to work perfectly fine here. But it looks perfectly fine, but it leads to the great problem. So if I rerun the program here, then this program leads to an exception, because here we have the non-nullable variable, and without initializing them, I'm simply printing the value of that one. That's why we have facing the exception here. Dart has given solution for this problem in the form of constructor. Now let me talk about constructor officially. Constructor is basically a special method which is invoked automatically when object is created. Constructor is used to initialize an object. Now why constructor is known as a special method? There are three reasons to call it as a special method. Let me tell the first one. Whenever we want to create a constructor in the class, make sure that name of the constructor is same as name of the class. It means if I want to define some constructor here, then name of this constructor has to be exactly same, that is the person here. So if the P is kept in the class, same has to be there while writing the constructor. Second thing is, constructor cannot have a return type. You can see here I'm getting error, constructor cannot have a return type. So if I want to define this as a constructor, so I need to remove this void, because even a void is not allowed as a return type in the constructor. Then the last and very important point is, constructor is invoked automatically when object is created. So you don't need to call the constructor explicitly over the object. Whenever object is created, it is invoked automatically for you. Now you can see in line number 17, I'm getting error here. This is because I'm writing person with opening and closing parentheses. It means it will try to call the default constructor from the person class. And you can see there is no such a default constructor, that is, there is no such a zero parameter constructor in the person class. Basically, we have only one constructor in the person class, and that has to accept two parameters. One is of type string and another is of integer. And these are the positional parameters. And as we know, all positional parameters by default are the compulsory one. That's the reason instead of using this default constructor, what I need to do, I need to pass the value for name. So let me pass my name, let's say CD here, and let me pass some value for age. So I'm passing value for age as 25, and when I rerun the program, you can see here instead of getting exception or any problem, I'm getting the value of name and age properly. Now you can observe here the problem for first statement is solved. That is, when we use constructor to initialize object, we don't need to remember that there is something that we have to call or we have to invoke to initialize, because when we use constructor, objects get initialized itself. That's what the constructor is made for. Now you guys might be waiting me to explain how constructor can solve the second problem. You can observe here the name and age variables are created using the late modifier. So let me delete this late from here and from here as well. Now you can see I will get two error here. That is, the value of name and age must be initialized. This is because the name and age are the non-nullable variable. It means value for those variable cannot be null. It must be initialized. Now you might be wondering that we are initializing it inside the constructor. The problem here is the variables get initialized after calling the constructor. That's the reason it is not allowed to write this variable as the non-nullable variable. Now to solve this problem, Dart has given the synthetic sugar for this one. That is, instead of initializing the variables inside the body of constructor, what we can do, we can initialize them just inside the declaration of constructor. So I need to remove this one, and what I need to do, I need to write here, let's say this dot name and this dot age here. Now you can observe here, when I use this kind of syntax to define my constructor, I can definitely enjoy the null safety feature given by the Dart. Basically, the constructor that I have defined here is the parameterized constructor. So what is parameterized constructor? What is default constructor? We'll talk about all these things when I will talk about the concept called different types of constructors in the Dart. I think basic for constructor is clear for you now. Now, in order to understand constructor in more detail, what I will do, I will explain 12 important features of constructor that will explain constructor in much more detail. So let's get started from the first one. Name of the constructor is same as name of the class. We already seen this point. It means, let's say, if name of the class is ABC, then the name of the constructor must be ABC. So here, if A is capital, it has to be capital here. Now, what if I change it to, let's say, small ABC? Now, in this case, this particular ABC doesn't use any syntactic error in the program. But make sure that this thing that I have written is not actually a constructor. It is a method. And as I'm not specifying a return type for this one, so if I click mouse on here, you can see by default it is considering dynamic as return type. So make sure that when I write this one, it's not a constructor, it is a normal method. But if I change this A to capital, now it's a constructor. Second point is constructor cannot have a return type, not even void. You can see I have defined a constructor ABC here, and now if I try to write void here, that is I want to define void as a return type for this constructor, I'm getting error here. It says that the constructor cannot have a return type, not even the void. This is because when we write a constructor, that is when we define constructor here, we are not allowed to define a return type for the constructor, but practically constructor returns the object which is initialized by it. You can see the proof from this one. Let's say if I click mouse on this constructor, you can see the documentation says that return type of this constructor is actually the object of this class itself. And you can also observe line number 9 here is when we create, let's say ABC reference is equals to this particular thing. So this is what the call to the constructor. And you can observe here as we are using these is equals to operator, that is this is the assignment operator that assigns the value on right side to the variable on left side. Now you can see here the value on right side is actually a constructor that we have. So after the successful invocation of constructor, what it will do, it will simply return the address, that is the hash code of this particular object which is initialized by the constructor, and that will be stored inside this reference on the left side of is equals to. Third point is constructor is invoked automatically when object is created. This is a very important property of the constructor. You can observe here in line number 9, I'm creating the object, that is I'm initializing the object by using the constructor that is the default one, and inside the constructor we have a print statement. So when we create the object, you can observe here the statement inside this constructor, that is this ABC code, is getting executed automatically. Let me create one more object here. So I have the object ABC. Let me create one more again, and when I rerun the program, you can observe here as I'm creating the object 3 times in the main, you can observe here I'm getting call to constructor 3 times on the console. Now it's very important to note that for a given object, constructor is invoked only once. Fourth point is constructor cannot be static. Let me write the static before this constructor. So when I write the static here, you can observe here, immediately I'm getting error here. It says constructor cannot be static. This is because when we write static before this constructor, it means this particular method now becomes a static method. And you might know that whenever we have a static method, to invoke that method, we have to call that one without an object simply by using class name dot the method name. And as we are calling something without an object, so it doesn't make sense to initialize an object. And constructor is mainly used, that is, constructor is basically made to initialize an object. So if we are calling a constructor without an object, so it doesn't make sense to write a constructor. That's the reason constructor cannot be static. When no constructor is defined in the class, that provides the default constructor in that class. Observe this class ABC, there is nothing in the class. I mean to say, there is no constructor in the class. But still, the line number 6 is valid. Okay, I can write the call to this constructor. Now you might be wondering, such a constructor is not at all available in the class because there is nothing in the class. Then how this line number 6 is working, that is how there is no error or there is no problem in this code. The simple reason is whenever we define a class and there is no constructor in the class, that will write a default constructor. So this is basically a constructor that accepts no parameter and there is nothing in the body of constructor. You can call this as the empty constructor. So if you want me to explain that how that constructor looks, it basically looks like this, that is this ABC and there's nothing inside the constructor. It's very important to note that when we write at least one constructor in the class, in this case, Dart won't write default constructor for you. Sixth point is Dart provides synthetic sugar to initialize fields using the constructor. You can observe here, we have a class called person that contains two fields, name and age, and this is what the constructor we have. Now, this is the traditional constructor that you might have seen in other programming languages like C++ and Java. Now consider your aim of writing constructor is just to initialize the field and nothing else. So what that suggests? That suggests don't write any definition for the constructor. Simply delete the definition. Just write a semicolon after the constructor declaration. And instead of writing this specific thing, what we have to do? We have to write it this dot name and this dot age. Basically, what this thing is called, we lots of people call this as the syntactic sugar to initialize the field using the constructor. This is of course correct here. Lots of students keep me asking, what's the difference of defining constructor in this way and defining the constructor in the traditional way? So if you have the same doubt, that is what is the difference between that one, let me know in the comment section so that I can create separate video for that one. Seventh point is constructors support positional and the name parameter as well as the combination of them. You can see in line number 7, we have a constructor that contains two positional parameters for the name and the age. And with respect to that one, inside the main, while creating an object, I'm passing the value of name and age as the positional parameter. Now instead of positional parameter, I can change it to the name parameter. So let me add the opening bracket and let me write the closing bracket here. Now in this case, these are the named parameter. It will give me an error, that is the value for this name and age cannot be null because these are the non-nullable variables. So what I need to do, I need to use annotation called required here. So let me write here required. Let me copy this required from here and let me paste it here. That's perfectly fine. And you can observe here in line number 16, I'm getting error because these name and age are the named parameter here. So I need to write here name colon the value of name and I need to change it to, let's say, age colon the value of age here. We can even have a combination of name and the positional parameter as well. So let me delete this opening curly bracket from here and let me place it here. So in this case, what is happening here, that this age is basically the named parameter and the name is basically the positional parameter. So that's why I need to remove this name column from here and that's perfectly fine. Now the value for name, that is the value for this name parameter, is compulsory. This is because it's a positional parameter and the value for age is not compulsory, but as we have written required here, it's compulsory for me. So this is what a combination of named and the position parameter in the constructor. 8 and a very important point in the Dart is Dart does not have constructor overloading, but using the concept of named constructor, it's possible to define multiple constructors in the class. We have the default constructor inside this person class. Now let me define one more constructor. So I'm trying here, let's say person, and let me pass, let's say string n, and let's say int a, that is the value for age here. And let me write the body for this constructor. You can observe here I'm getting error. So let me check out the error. It says that unnamed constructor is already defined. The reason here is Dart don't have the concept of overloading. It means we cannot write multiple methods or multiple constructors having the same name. So if we have the constructor with name person, we cannot write the same constructor here even by changing the parameter list. In order to solve this problem, Dart has given the concept called named constructor. We'll talk about what is named constructor in our upcoming session, but just for now, let's understand the basic. So let's say if I want to define one more constructor, what I can do, I can simply write a dot after this one. Let's say right here, let's say some other. Now this person class has got two constructors. First is the default one and the another one is the name constructor. Now if you want to initialize object using this constructor, simply you have to write the person. That's how I have written in line number 17. And now if you want to call this constructor, what you have to do? After writing this person, simply you have to write dot and you have to call some other, and inside this some other, what I need to do, as these are the compulsory parameter, the positional parameter, I must pass some value. Let me pass value as mark and some age, let's say 35, and that's it. We can define as many constructors in the class as we want simply by using the named constructor concept. The ninth point is there can be public as well as private constructor in the class based on your requirement. We know that whenever we write some variable or method simply by using underscore, that method or that variable becomes a private variable. So same case or same thing is applicable to constructor. For example, for this default constructor, if I use underscore before defining this one, then in this case, this particular constructor is now a private constructor. It means this constructor can only be called in the same library where the code is written, that is inside the same Dart file, not outside the another Dart file. Basically, we make the constructor private in two different situations. The first one is we don't want anyone to create the instance or object of this class out of this particular library. And second is when we want to implement singleton class design pattern. We'll talk about what is the singleton class design pattern in our upcoming videos. 10th point is constructors are not inherited. Rather, the subclass constructor has to call desired superclass constructor. Just observe here, we have two different class. The first one is the father class and another one is the son class. The father class is basically acting as the superclass, and as the son class is extending the father class, this particular son class acts as the child, or you can say it is the subclass of this father class. You can observe here, this father class has got the single parameter constructor, and inside the son class we have the default constructor. And with respect to default constructor in the son class, in line number 14, I'm simply creating the object of this son class, and that's fine in line number 14. But you can see in line number 8, I'm getting error. The problem here is by default, when we write the constructor in the subclass, every constructor in the subclass will try to call the default constructor in the superclass. It means this son constructor is basically trying to look for the default constructor in the father class. And you can observe here in this father class there is no default constructor. Now either we have to define the default constructor in the father class, or we have to call the specific constructor, that is we have to call this one parameter constructor to this son constructor. And consider that I don't want to modify this father class, so it means there is no chance to write the default constructor in the father class. And now as we have learned the statement that constructors are not inherited, rather the derived class constructor or the subclass constructor has to call specific constructor of the superclass. So what I need to do here is through this subclass constructor, simply I'm writing here colon, and let me write here super. Inside the super, let me pass some value. So what does it mean? It means the constructor of son, that is constructor of subclass, is calling the superclass constructor. So this super in bracket 10 allows me to call the one parameter. This basically 10 doesn't matter because this is just a value. So the super 10 is basically the superclass one parameter constructor, and of course I have that one in the father class. So when I run this program, you can observe here, as I'm creating the object of sun here, you can observe before calling the constructor of sun, what is happening here? The constructor of fathers get called, and then the constructor of son, that is the constructor of subclass, gets called. 11th point is factory constructor must return an object explicitly. Basically, I will talk about what is factory constructor and why to use that one in our upcoming sessions. But for this, try to understand this particular property. This is a very interesting thing to notice. We say that constructor don't have return type, not even a void, and practically we cannot return anything to the constructor. But factory constructor is exception for that one. It means whenever we define factory constructor, you can see in line number 8 we have defined factory constructor. So this is basically normal constructor. Whenever we write factory keyword before any constructor, that becomes a factory constructor. Okay, I will talk about what it is in the upcoming session. Don't worry about this one. You can see I'm getting error on the line number 8. The reason for error is it's compulsory for me to return something because by default it is returning null. So what I need to do, I need to copy this line from here and I need to put it as a return value. So let me write here return and paste this particular constructor here, and that's going to work fine. This is because for this constructor it's compulsory for us to return the specific object, that is to return some instance. Now the 12th and the last point is one constructor may invoke another constructor. This concept is basically called the constructor redirecting. For this class test, we have defined two constructors. This is the default constructor and this one is the named constructor. You can observe here in line number 12, that is inside the main, I'm calling test.something, that is I'm calling the named constructor. But for this name constructor, what I'm doing, I have written this with the bracket. So when we write this with bracket, it is actually called the this construct, which is responsible for calling another constructor through the given constructor. So as I'm not passing any value inside this bracket, it's responsible for calling the default constructor. It means whenever we call this test.someName constructor, it actually invokes this default constructor. So that's the reason when I click on run button, you can see even I'm creating object through this someName constructor, you can observe here that the default constructor gets invoked. That's it for this video. See you guys in the next video. If you really like the way I'm explaining the concept, then don't forget to like, share, subscribe and hit the bell notification button to get my latest videos.